This is a racetrack. It's our racetrack, to be precise. And this is a Porsche 911 GT3. A car made for the track, for extracting fastest laps, for driving as fast as you possibly can while the stopwatch times you, for giving you reasons to boast that you are much faster than your mates. But not this one. You see, this particular 911 GT3 was meant to be used on the road. In case you can't work it out, this is a visual metaphor.
It's a wolf in sheep's clothing, you see. But how much of a wolf in sheep's clothing actually is the 911 GT3 Touring? You see, Touring suggests it should be able to go thousands of miles across Europe without you breaking a sweat, or maybe that it's stealthier than its really hairy GT3 brother. And, yeah, alright, when you first look at it, it does have that classic clean 911 profile, and it could be almost any 911, but then you actually take a second look at it and you realise that it looks rather a lot like a GT3. So, what actually is different about this car? After much investigation, we found out there are 3 things different about the GT3 Touring compared to the GT3. They are the anodised aluminium silver surrounds on the windows. They're not on this one because they're black. The anodised aluminium silver surrounds on the exhaust, but not on this one because they're black. And a little bit more leather on the inside. Oh, and there's no rear wing. But other than that, they're exactly the same. Underneath, it's the same. It has the same engine, the same roll bars, the same camber, the same toe. It has the same multi-link suspension at the rear and the same double wishbone suspension at the front. It has the same lightweight glass and the same lightweight bonnet at the front. So, if the two cars are exactly the same except for the deletion of a wing, what's the point of driving it? The other slight difference between the two is that the standard GT3 comes fitted with some pretty hardcore Michelin Cup 2 tyres. But if you buy a GT3 Touring, you can tick a little box that'll give you some Pirelli P0 Corsas. Now the difference is that these have a slightly higher sidewall, which means there's a little bit more give, and therefore makes the ride potentially a tiny bit softer. But one of the things that surprised us when Sean drove the GT3 was just how good a car on the road it actually was, despite being a sort of hardcore track machine. So I guess the question here really is, if you've made it ever so slightly softer and you've taken away the rear wing, does that make it a slightly better road car? Is it actually really any different? Or would you just choose a Touring because it looks better?
As we mentioned, there is absolutely no difference between the GT3 and the Touring mechanically. They both have the same 4-litre flat-six engine producing 510 horsepower and 470 Nm of torque, which, you may notice, makes the GT3 quite significantly less well endowed than the 911 Turbo. With the 6-speed manual gearbox, it'll hit 60 miles an hour in 3.9 seconds, although that drops to 3.5 if you opt for the 7-speed PDK dual clutch, which is no extra cost. Top speed is 199 miles an hour. At 131,000 base, the GT3 is significantly cheaper than, say, a Turbo S, but it's also a second slower to 60 miles an hour. This is a car very much pinned on its abilities to excite rather than just impress.
The other thing to remember is that without that big rear wing, you don't get the 80 kilograms of downforce at 124 miles an hour. But, in case something's changed and no one told me, 124 miles an hour is still very, very, very illegal. So, you're not really going to be finding out.
It might be sort of billed as a road car, but the GT3 does make its true nature clear the moment you start it up. The engine clatters at idle, feeling like it's a racing engine not designed for the road. It feels like it's really wanting to just move. Only when it is moving does it start to sound like an actually working piece of engineering.
When you set off, it can feel a little bit jarring at first. It really does feel like that track day car that's just been let out onto the road. It rides incredibly firmly even in its normal setting, just not in a way that's ever going to unnerve you or spit you out across into the next lane, but just in a way that makes you remember that perhaps it would really like some lovely, lovely smooth track tarmac. But then you put it into sport mode and you set the suspension to its firmer setting and you start to drive. Oh, and it all starts to make sense. There's confidence that just flows from that front end. It's incredibly sharp. You can turn in with absolute confidence that it's going to grip. And then in the mid-corner, that grip just continues. It sort of flows with a beautiful weight through the steering, as if it's just going, you know what, mate, you can keep going here, we're fine, I've got this. It encourages you to just keep your foot in, bringing your heart rate back down. It's an incredible way that it can make you feel exhilarated and calm at the same time. It's almost as if they've fitted a front wing to this rather than just taken one away from the back. It goes exactly where you look. And then there's that engine, and every single one of those 470 Newton meters is available to you because it's rear wheel drive and there's nothing being sent to the front, so you can continue your steering with the throttle and come out of a corner and floor it, and you'll feel it straighten up with a wonderful confident boost. And if you're at 7,000 RPM, it will just absolutely hurl itself off into the distance. The suspension, which feels really irritating if you're just driving around town, at speed and in its firmer setting, it just makes so much sense. It's the ride control that is incredible. The two settings are basically the same in terms of firmness, but stick it in the sport mode and it will just gather everything together almost instantaneously, and that works incredibly well with that double wishbone suspension, which just helps you to keep a constant tyre contact patch. That between the two of them, they make this car feel like it could never leave the ground, almost no matter which bump you hit. And then it's mated to this wonderful manual gearbox, and I know the PDK is excellent and very good and it does drop the 0 to 60 time, but if you don't get it with 3 pedals, you are really missing out. It's mechanical, it's tricky at times, it's got a real knack to doing it, and the clutch has a really short biting point, but it makes you pay attention and it means you've got to actually get it right. Actually, it's not called the 911 GT3 Touring, even though it says that on the back. It's a 911 GT3 with the Touring pack, which, you know, maybe points to the fact that we're getting it a little bit wrong. It's not a touring car. It's not a car that we're going to be sitting in for hours on end and then arriving in Monaco feeling happy. This seat, for example, costs £2,800 and it's really very nice, but it's quite uncomfortable after a little while. It's firm and you can't change the back. The suspension is irritatingly firm at low speed, but it's still, just like the normal GT3, one of the best cars around. It's obviously just one of the best road cars there is in the world, and it's raw. There's that suspension in this seat. There's the fact that there's no rear seat, so the engine feels like it's just been propped against your back. You can feel it oscillate through the seat, despite the fact that it's at least 3 feet behind me. It hates being at idle, and it doesn't like not being at speed, but it's still magnificent when you let it go. So at the end of the day, whichever you choose, the 911 GT3 or Touring, it's going to be entirely up to you. It could be aesthetics, looks better. It could be just the fact that it's got that softer rubber that heats up quicker and makes you feel more confident. Actually, it could just be because the Touring's easier to reverse.